In our headlines on this Wednesday, June 17th, here in South Korea, President Lee Jae-myung joins his global counterparts at this year's expanded G7 summit in France that seeks common ground on issues of mutual interest. Meanwhile, as the U.S. and Iran prepare to sit down in Switzerland this coming Friday to formally sign their MOU for peace, conflicting remarks continue to make headlines with regard to Tehran's nuclear missions and a reconstruction fund for its country. Also, U.S. President Donald Trump shares confidence in ending Russian aggression against Ukraine, given his prospects for peace in the Middle East. We start our newscast today in France, where President Lee Jae-myung urged his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump for his support in charting peace on the Korean peninsula. Now, remarks to this end were made during a photo session ahead of the expanded G7 talks. Our Yoon Jung-min files this report from Europe.
World leaders are in the French town of Evian-les-Bains for the gathering of the world's most influential powers. Leaders from the G7 countries were present, including U.S. President Donald Trump, and 5 other leaders were invited, including South Korean President Lee Jae-myung. The host, French President Emmanuel Macron, greeted guests one by one.
How are you, Mr. President? I'm so happy. How are you?
The session began with a group photo during which President Lee met his American counterpart Trump for a short greeting. In the readout, the Blue House said Trump asked Lee about recent developments in inter-Korean relations, and Lee asked Trump to lead a peaceful resolution of issues relating to North Korea, noting Trump's contribution to the recent U.S. Iran peace agreement. Trump reportedly responded positively. Tuesday's session addressed reforming current international development cooperation system, aiming to reduce financial dependency on external assistance and create progress incentives. In line with that, the South Korean president stressed the importance of private capital, introducing a recent case where South Korea helped Indonesia secure private investment worth $50 million through its financial assistance in the agriculture and energy sectors. President Lee pitched his vision for a global AI-basic society, where the fruits of AI technology are shared with all countries, and he also brought up the need to bolster vocational training in developing nations. At the summit, the group of 7 leaders adopted 3 joint statements on mutually beneficial international partnerships, a coordinated response to recent Ebola outbreak, and the fight against cancer. Later in the day, the leaders joined a social dinner and a concert in the small French town, which sits on the southern shore of Lake Geneva.
President Lee says his attendance at the G7 for the second consecutive year demonstrates the trust and expectations of the international community, vowing to safeguard national interests and fulfill South Korea's responsible role on the global stage. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News, Geneva.
That being said, President Lee Jae-myung sought to sit down separately with his G7 counterparts to share thoughts on bilateral interests. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yu-jin covers his discussions with the leaders of Canada and Germany.
President Lee Jae-myung's summit diplomacy continued on the sidelines of the G7 summit. On Tuesday, he held back-to-back talks with the leaders of Canada and Germany. President Lee and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney focused on deepening strategic cooperation in defense, security, energy, and critical minerals.
지금은 유사 입장국으로서 서로에게 도움이 되는 관계로 이 양국 관계가 매우 발전하고 있습니다. 우리 서로 협력할 게 많으니까 오늘 어떤 협력을 더 구체적으로 할지 한번 논의해 보기로 하죠.
Since we last met in Korea, our partnerships continue to grow. We're working across defense, across investment, across trade, on all aspects, including on the cultural side. So it's.
According to the Blue House, President Lee said that Korea is prepared to help strengthen Canada's defense capabilities as a trusted partner. Prime Minister Carney responded that Canada places great importance on cooperation with Korea and agreed to continue discussions on related initiatives. The meeting comes as Korea's Hanwha Ocean and Germany's TKMS compete for a multi-billion-dollar submarine contract from Canada. Citing Canada's Secretary of State for Defense Procurement, Politico reported last Saturday that Ottawa expects to select its preferred bidder within 30 days. Before meeting with Prime Minister Carney, President Lee held separate talks with German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. High on the agenda was expanding cooperation in the economy, defense, science and technology sectors, as well as international security.
독일과 대한민국은 많은 영역에서 서로 협력하고 또 협력을 통해 시너지를 만들 수 있는 국가라고 생각합니다.
On defense, the two leaders discussed moving beyond competition toward joint research and development, co-production, and joint entry into third country markets. Chancellor Merz also invited President Lee to the Asia-Pacific Conference of German Business, which will be held in Seoul later this year.
So I'm very much looking forward to my visit to your country by the end of October. We invite you to give a speech and to be part of this important conference.
More bilateral meetings are expected on Wednesday, the final day of this year's G7 summit. 송유진, Arirang News.
Also, on the sidelines of this year's G7 summit, U.S. President Donald Trump took time to tout yet again the U.S.'s peace framework with Iran, claiming that it essentially eliminates Iran's nuclear ambitions. Our Kim Do-yeon covers his remarks.
Iran will be permanently barred from developing or acquiring nuclear weapons under a new framework agreement reached with the United States. That's according to U.S. President Donald Trump at the G7 summit in France on Tuesday as he addressed the U.S. Iran deal to end the war.
Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. That's what it says. It won't have one to buy, to develop. They will not have a nuclear weapon. And I would say that's about 99.9% of what I wanted, because we couldn't let that happen.
The Memorandum of Understanding also secures immediate halt of the 15-week conflict and the permanent, toll-free reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, a critical global oil supply route. President Trump noted that the deal has already begun impacting global markets.
The ships are starting to move nicely, oil is starting to go, and the prices are coming down rapidly. Stock market is going up rapidly. A lot of good things are happening.
The formal signing ceremony is scheduled for this Friday in Switzerland, after which there will be a 60-day period to finalize the treaty. According to multiple reports, a $300 billion private investment vehicle named the Reconstruction and Development Fund has been established to rebuild Iran. Reuters reports that more than half of that sum has already been committed by international corporations, including firms from South Korea, Japan, Singapore, and the United States. The White House and Vice President J.D. Vance emphasized that the fund is entirely private, utilizing zero U.S. government grants, taxpayer money, or state reparations. The fund remains strictly separate from parallel negotiations regarding the lifting of primary U.S. sanctions and the release of frozen Iranian sovereign assets, and it will not become operational until a final treaty is signed. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
And as mentioned in that report, the U.S. and Iran are poised to formally pen their Memorandum of Understanding in Switzerland this coming Friday. But Israel's continued military strikes against the Hezbollah in Lebanon look to derail broader regional peace efforts. Our Shin So-eun explains.
Following the electronic signing of an interim agreement, the United States and Iran will formally sign their Armistice Memorandum of Understanding in Bürgenstock, Switzerland on Friday. According to Swiss authorities, the venue was moved from Geneva to the secluded Alpine location with the mountain resort overlooking Lake Lucerne in central Switzerland. The new location comes at the request of the U.S., Iran, and the Middle East mediators to offer tighter securities and protection. Regarding the release of the agreement, President Donald Trump says it will be made public within a couple of days, and that he plans to submit the document to Congress for review. But administration officials say the delay is deliberate.
So there are some diplomatic protocols, Sean. There are some sequencing that the Pakistanis have been involved in this, the Qataris have been involved in this. And what the president has said is the agreement will come out on Friday. He may decide to release the agreement sooner than that. But we have this formal ceremony on Friday, and that's when the president right now wants to release the memorandum.
Despite efforts to finalize a peace deal in Lebanon, where a ceasefire remains one of Tehran's key demands, violence has yet to be halted. Israeli drone strike killed at least 4 people on Tuesday as clashes between Israel and the Iran-backed Hezbollah militia continued. In response, Trump publicly rebuked and urged Israel to scale back its military campaign against Hezbollah. Accusing Israeli strikes on Beirut of jeopardizing his peace efforts with Tehran, Trump added that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu should show greater restraint and responsibility with Lebanon. The continued fighting in Lebanon has become a growing source of tension between the two leaders, with Iran making a ceasefire there a key condition of the broader peace agreement. Shin So-eun, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, U.S. President Donald Trump has voiced confidence in ending Russian aggression against Ukraine, given his prospects of peace in the Middle East. Our Lee Seung-jae has the latest.
President Donald Trump said Tuesday that he wants to turn his attention to ending the war in Ukraine after reaching a framework agreement with Iran, and told reporters that the Middle East issue will soon be in the rear-view mirror. Speaking on the sidelines of the Group of Seven summit in France, Trump said he had a very good meeting with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and planned to meet him again later in the day. Trump said he would do whatever he could to help bring an end to the conflict and urged Russia to negotiate a settlement. The U.S. leader noted that both Russia and Ukraine have suffered heavy losses during the war and stressed that a deal should be reached as soon as possible.
Look, Russia should make a deal. Russia's lost tremendous amounts of people, and so has Ukraine. Last month, they lost 35,000 soldiers between the two of them.
Ukraine continues to demonstrate its ability to strike targets deep inside Russia, using drones and missiles to put growing pressure on the Kremlin, while Moscow has vowed to carry out what it calls systematic attacks on Ukraine. Early Monday, Russian forces launched a series of deadly attacks on Kyiv, including an attack that set fire to a historic monastery. Despite the ongoing challenges, Trump struck an optimistic tone, saying he had productive conversations with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Zelensky ahead of the summit. He added that there may now be an opportunity to make progress toward ending the war as diplomatic efforts gain renewed attention from world leaders gathered at the G7. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
In other news now, a former White House official during the first Trump administration says Seoul and Washington should seek to forge a civil nuclear partnership in response to the current environment of geopolitics. Our senior correspondent Oh Soo-young covers his remarks.
Washington shouldn't waste any time in strengthening its energy security and industrial base by expanding civil nuclear cooperation with Korea, a trusted ally. That's according to Vice Chair of America First Policy Institute Fred Fleitz, who says Seoul has earned broader rights to develop peaceful nuclear technology.
President Trump decided it was time to modernize this relationship. We're not there yet in terms of giving South Korea access to the full nuclear fuel cycle, but obviously we're moving in that direction. I think it's a good development.
His comments come as Seoul and Washington this month held their first round of negotiations on Korea's rights to uranium enrichment, spent fuel reprocessing, and civil nuclear cooperation. Korea operates one of the world's most advanced nuclear power industries, with reactor technology exported to the UAE and selected for an $18 billion project in the Czech Republic. Meanwhile, the US is racing to rebuild domestic fuel supply chains as AI and data centers drive up demand for power, which the Electric Power Research Institute says could consume up to 9% of US electricity by 2030. However, Washington has limited capacity to produce fuel for next-generation reactors, relying on Russia for roughly one-third of its enrichment services as of 2023. Fleitz argues Korea could help address such challenges, yet outdated restrictions stand in the way.
The Netherlands, Brazil, and Argentina can make their own nuclear fuel rods, but South Korea cannot. That makes no sense. Japan and India can reprocess spent fuel rods. Now, if we can trust India and Brazil and Argentina with the sensitive nuclear technology, obviously South Korea can be trusted.
Some non-proliferation experts have long opposed the spread of enrichment and reprocessing technologies. But Fleitz points to Korea's record of responsible nuclear stewardship.
And they don't want nuclear technology spreading to nations who may use them for weapons purposes. South Korea is clearly not one of them. It has a model record in abiding by its nuclear treaty obligations.
The former Trump advisor says deeper cooperation would benefit both countries as they seek reliable energy supplies and resilience in critical industries.
Because I believe that South Korean companies are on the brink of some remarkable discoveries and new innovations that will produce significant amounts of fuel at much lower cost with much less waste and will reduce the need for carbon fuel.
Korean officials say Seoul and Washington could hold a second round of negotiations as early as July. Young, Arirang News.
The Bank of Korea believes consumer prices here will remain high throughout the year as the heavy burden of energy costs is expected to linger longer. Our Baek Joo-hee reports.
Korea's consumer inflation will hover around 3% in the second half of this year, according to the Bank of Korea's biannual inflation review report released on Wednesday. Core inflation is also forecast to reach the mid to high 2% range. Even looking ahead to next year, the central bank expects both headline and core inflation to continuously exceed its target stability level of 2%.
It will likely take a long time for energy supply chains to normalize to previous levels and for global oil prices to stabilize.
Taking a closer look at this year's inflation path, consumer prices started the year stable at 2%. However, the trend sharply reversed following the outbreak of the Middle East conflict, with May inflation bounding back to 3.1%. A key concern for policymakers is a lingering impact of high energy costs. The central bank notes that even if global oil prices cool, the indirect effects of high energy costs typically take about 6 months to fully fit into other manufactured goods and processed foods and can persist for up to a year. Adding fuel to the fire is an unprecedented surge in corporate bonuses within the booming IT and semiconductor sectors.
Wage hikes also risk further intensifying upward inflationary pressures from both the cost and demand sides.
The central bank warns that when top-tier bonuses are heavily concentrated in specific industries, it elevates reference wages nationwide. This creates general wage hike pressures across other sectors, which eventually stimulates demand-side inflation by adding an extra 0.05 percentage points to consumer prices. The governor of the central bank dismissed speculations of a potential big step interest rate hike, drawing a clear line by saying it was a measure brought up only when the market conditions were tough. Baek Joo-hee, Arirang News.
Also on the local front, Korean retail investors poured over $800 million to secure SpaceX shares during the company's first day of trading. According to relevant officials here on this Wednesday, individual investors purchased a net $808 million worth of SpaceX shares on June 12th through 11 brokerage firms. The buying spree followed SpaceX's NASDAQ debut and marked one of the largest single-day purchases of a single U.S. stock by Korean retail investors. Meanwhile, on the entertainment front, K-drama series Teach You a Lesson has topped the Netflix non-English TV show chart for a second week in a row. According to official findings as of this Wednesday, the series had amassed 21.1 million views between June 8th and June 14th. It also topped the charts in 46 countries. Based on a popular webtoon, the series follows a fictional government agency created to defend teachers' rights and restore order within the academic arena. A prestigious culinary school in Paris says French interest in Korean temple food has been gaining greater traction in recent times as a growing number of people seek mindful eating. Our culture correspondent Park Gun-woo files this report from the ground.
Korean temple food continues to grow in popularity, especially in France, one of the world's gastronomic capitals. At prestigious culinary school Le Cordon Bleu, Paris, the centuries-old Korean tradition has been taught for a decade. And according to the school's top chef, demand is continuing to grow as more people seek healthier and more balanced diets.
People have become increasingly concerned about the health and purity of what they eat. This has led to a growing interest in temple food. Fermentation, which brings probiotics and plays an important role in a healthy, balanced diet. And temple food, in particular, gives us a very different vision of ingredients and what a balanced diet can be.
The growing global interest comes as Korea's Buddhist community is pushing to have temple food recognized as a UNESCO intangible cultural heritage. Riffer believes the tradition deserves the recognition.
What UNESCO has recognized in France is not simply food, but its culinary tradition. It's about families gathering around the table and sharing a moment together. Korean temple food, with its focus on balance, health, and spirituality, also deserves recognition as a heritage. It is not just food, but a living cultural tradition.
Looking ahead, Le Cordon Bleu Paris plans to deepen its cooperation with Korea's culinary community. So this year marks the 140th anniversary of diplomatic ties between Korea and France. Do you see any opportunities for deeper cooperation between the school and Korea?
Diplomacy is also culinary diplomacy and cultural exchange. This year, there will be more demonstrations on Korean temple food open to the public. We also have big premises at the very heart of Paris set to be open for workshops and demonstrations of Korean temple food.
From Paris to Seoul, the school says Korean cuisine will continue to serve as a bridge between the two countries, deepening cultural exchange and mutual understanding. Park Geon-woo, Arirang News, Paris.
Temperatures climbed above 30 degrees Celsius across most parts of the country again today, bringing hot daytime conditions. Amid the heat, this year's first heat advisory will take effect at 11 a.m. tomorrow for Gyeongsan, Yecheon, and Guni in the Gyeongsangbuk-do Province and Daegu area. The heat also helped trigger scattered showers. Through early tomorrow morning, showers are expected in many inland areas nationwide. The amount of rainfall will range from 5 to 60 millimeters, and some areas could see gusty winds, lightning, and even hail. A few inland areas may see additional showers tomorrow. 5 to 30 millimeters are expected during the afternoon. As for temperatures, most areas will start the day at around 20 degrees. Seoul 21 degrees, Chuncheon 19 degrees, Daegu 21 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 31 degrees, Daegu at 33 degrees, Busan 28 degrees. Another round of rain is forecast for southern regions and Jeju Island on Friday and Saturday. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
Right, those are the headlines at the hour here in South Korea. Coming up next, our daily panel session, so do stay with us.